She Wants It. Particularly, there's a section that's always stuck with me where you talk about having this moment of realization where you suddenly understood wanting as a powerful, even dignified activity rather than an expression of need. And in watching the episodes of Transparent and Pose for this class, I mean, wanting is kind of the fundamental drive for all people, I think, but the characters in these series are, driven by wanting comfort in one's own body as a trans person, stability, safety, validation, freedom, all these kinds of things. So in a lot of these cases, the wanting is related directly to the notion of being queer, as it pertains to gender identity, sexual orientation. And in this class, it's been interesting because we've been challenged to think of queerness kind of outside of the context of gender and sexual identity or orientation, and more think of queerness as like a rejection of norms or expectations. So I was kind of hoping you might be able to touch on kind of the intersection of wanting and queerness as like a larger challenge to these kind of established norms and systems. And then kind of to like try and clarify that, like if the notion of wanting is reframed as powerful and the notion of queerness is reframed as a rejection of norms and an embrace of a new way of living, where would they collide after our fundamental needs are met as queer and trans people? And where does the notion of wanting kind of take us on a larger scale?
That's a good question. Do you want me to go, Silas, or do you want to go?
Oh, I think I thought it was specific for you for your book.
Okay, great. Oh,
This one,
yes,
yeah.
the book, She Wants It. Okay. I think I've moved off of wanting and desire, and I've moved more I've been really into the word yearning lately. And I think, or what I'm trying to sort of feel my way into is what you do with the camera when you're wanting to express desire slash wanting slash yearning. And asking that question first as like, what is the male gaze? What is the female gaze? What is the trans gaze? And what does that mean, for a camera to have a gender, or for a camera to either witness, document, see, look, all these things that I think a lot of, white men were doing with the camera, which was looking and inviting others to look with them. One white man inviting another white man to look is basically what most American cinema is. So then when I started talking about the female gaze, I asked the questions: what does it mean to be looked at? What does it mean to be wanted? What does it mean to want to be wanted? And how does the camera show that? How does the camera say, I am wanted, I want to be wanted, I see you wanting me? And when I look back at the work I did when I thought I was cis and where I was trying to explore the female gaze, it was all about trying to disrupt the male gaze with a disruption of like, who is yearning? How is the camera helping them yearn? How is the camera showing the yearner? And it was all in this very binary opposition to the male gaze. And then when I came out as trans and started to ask, well, what's the trans gaze? And in particular, I think coming up with this idea around a trans trickster gaze when I was watching Framing Agnes, because I had to go and like judge movies at Sundance, and I had to be fair. And yet there was one documentary that like all my friends were in, or one movie that all my friends were in. It was called Framing Agnes. And I was like, I love this movie. Is it because all my friends are in it? And I had to really figure out, like, do I love this movie and why do I love it? Not because all my friends are in it. And I wanted to watch it over and over again. I was comparing it to a couple of just cis filmmakers. And what the filmmaker did in Framing Agnes was he just kept changing what to expect. And it was like, here are people talking, here are people performing as people who were subjects of a trans documentation experiment. And yet, as these actors are getting their makeup on to play the subjects of an experiment, they're talking about how it was for them to get to the set that day and their day. And I was like, that's what I've always wanted, for a movie to stop and to have the actors go to hair and makeup, and we see them in hair and makeup explaining how they got to the set. I was like, no, I love this. I love what the filmmaker is doing. It feels exactly right. It's going in a circle and it's going backwards. It's offering me what I never expected, but is totally satisfying in a way that a trans filmmaker asks themselves, how do I best tell the story about trans people being looked at? And so to me, I just felt like the trans gaze inherently not only rebuked the male gaze, but also rebuked the notion of a binary gaze, a male gaze, or a female gaze, and started to notice that a lot of trans filmmakers were simply just doing the opposite of what was expected. And now I'm in the place where I believe that yearning is actually the center of all things, but it's the yearning to disrupt white supremacy and patriarchy. And it's not the same as white yearning, and it's not the same as patriarchal yearning. It's other yearning. It's the other yearning. It's the yearning to say, you know, I have always been here, even before and after you were white, or even before and after you were a male. So I don't think there's like such thing as the female gaze or the trans gaze, because it's just would be way too small to compare to the male gaze, which is not only all of the history of cinema, but also the history of sports and violence. So when you say, what is the female gaze? What is the trans gaze? Like, these are these two teeny tiny infinitesimal pinpricks of light around being assigned female at birth or being trans, just pinpricks of light towards protagonism and I am for anybody who's not white and cis. But that's all I got. You know, I feel like all I've ever made was me yearning to disrupt the white gaze or the patriarchal gaze. And I've been clumsy about it. I've been sloppy about it. I've been unintentional about it. I've gone from my feelings of anger, you're like, no, not shooting this way. But in terms of like creating a cohesive theory around like what trans people or women are doing with the camera, I think it's just like, it's so small, you know, it's just a miracle that any of us have a camera in the first place. But what we're actually doing with it and how it's affecting others and how is it reaching the critical mass and how is it entering culture, like it just feels so small for me. Like the fight is still so huge and we're still so far behind. That's what I gotta say.
Silas, sorry, I didn't mean to make it seem as though it was a question just for Joey. I was also curious kind of about what you think about the intersection of wanting after fundamental needs are met for queer people, like safety and stability and all these things.
Yeah, wow, I just was so lost in hearing Joey's response, which was really fascinating to me. Yeah, I don't, it is a good question. I'm trying to think in terms of like the visual representation of film, or sorry,
I think I almost mean more in like almost how would like a queer utopia manifest if we're thinking of queerness not just as identity and expression, but as like a rejection of norms and kind of suffocating expectations culturally.
Yeah. So I guess it's true. Like the burden of representation is something I constantly am trying to push against. And again, I feel like in Transparent, there was a lot of freeing from that, I felt, in terms of like going into the messiness. And I think I do wrestle with that. There's so much pushing against and having to, again, explain ourselves, having to push against explaining ourselves. So there's this like, for me, it's like having to recognize what burden is put on me in terms of trying to represent stories of people who are X, Y, and Z, and then trying to correct. So the utopia is very far on the horizon for figuring out. But for me, it's just the thing that I really try to push into is the flawed and messy person, like to not try to depict transness as we're so not a monolith. We have like such varied experiences that God, I don't know. I've had to think about this. I can't come up with a very short answer to it because I do live in it so much. I think I'm constantly just trying to swim my way through to just ultimately go into this human story that's about being a fucked up human on the planet in sort of odd circumstances and how to maneuver through that. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for going first.
Yeah. I'm also going to turn up the volume even. We got a speaker in here, so now we can hear you really well.
Hello, I'm Nathan. I'm a third-year MFA student in the School of Media Arts, and I'm primarily a screenwriter myself. So I think you can answer this. I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about the pitching process when you pitched your show to the studio? That would be really interesting.
Yeah, so the pitching process for transparent, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
we can hear
Yeah. The pitching process for transparent and really all shows are really all the same. It's really you have to kind of prepare yourself as if you're giving a TED talk, but then enter the room as if you're best buddies and you need nothing from them. You have to kind of get it all in your head as if you're going to give a giant presentation, but then be so casual that I think what you're sharing with the people is something that feels like it's natural and it's from your heart. You know, if they want it, great. If they don't want it, also great. I think pitching is really more about communicating what kind of leader you are and what kind of communicator you are. I think they're not listening to the pitch. They're watching to see how you are as somebody they can trust 10 or 20 or $30 million with. So I just try to really keep that in mind, that, you know, what's really in the pitch doesn't matter, but my human connection with the people in the room does. And what they're going to want to feel is that they contributed and that they thought of something during the meeting and that I took it and I transformed it and I said, great idea. So I don't really look at them as pitch meetings. I look at them as kind of fake meetings where I'm playing a part, which is a really great showrunner. And that's what I'm trying to communicate.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I
And
love that saying it's a great idea that it's their idea. That's a good trick to just keep in mind in life in general for power
in
dynamics.
general, right? Everybody just wants to.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm going to jump off for 1 second. I have to run into this gas station. I will be right back.
Okay, please.
But yeah, so
Be
for
right
pitching,
there.
I would agree with Joey too. It is a performance. It's a bit of a, so they want connections. It's really hard to read off of a page, but when pitching a show or a movie, it is a bit of a, you don't want to feel too memorized and you want to engage. So I try to keep it short and thematic. I try to go like really the personal connections, but themes seem to really grab people. Like if you can go, this is also a show about, you know, X, Y, and Z, about, you know, what is the truth and what is a lie. Like if you can have these kind of hooky, very short teasers for it, it helps get people to ask questions. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, Raf, I could go.
Question in my head a little bit
Are you
there.
still thinking? Yeah, Lauren, why don't you go ahead? We got a question from Zoom. Silas and Joey. Lauren's gonna ask a question.
If you want to go on camera, that would be cool. If not,
I can't right now, or else I totally would. I'm kind of like multitasking here, but I can't. That the first question, man, that was amazing. So I don't know if mine's gonna be as great as that. Like hard one to follow. But I just wanted to know a few. Like I have two questions, I guess. One is I'm a personal independent filmmaker, single parent of 3, live in Southern Illinois. I just wanted some advice, like, or encouragement on how to like keep going when you feel like maybe you're not getting very far. I know that's kind of redundant, but I feel like that's one of them that would help me out. And the other one is just recommendations on either a book or a film or something that was really life changing for you that inspired you as an artist. And if you would pass on that, you know, whatever that is to us so that we could go view it or read it as well.
I'll jump in since Joey is off for a second. Yeah, I will. The first question I have a lot of thoughts on. The second one, I'm never good at remembering a specific text to cite, but in terms of keeping going, I was very late to the game of success, meaning financial success. Yeah, I really was. And even though my first film went to Sundance and we had no experience, we just made it. We homeschooled ourselves. We read all the books and we decided to cast ourselves as the lead and co-direct it and co-write it. And it's still playing like 22 years later. So that's really an honor, but it almost killed us. And I was like, oh my God, I never want to do that again. And I also didn't get the memo, you have to be independently wealthy to do independent film. So those are not very encouraging words. But the thing is, I couldn't stop telling stories. And so what I did is made anything I could get my hands on, whether it was a short, music video, some sort of web series, a feature. And I did a feature 10 years later called Sunset Stories that was made for the same budget as my first feature. And I kept being engaged in the process. And then I was really, really like 40 years old when by the time I got to direct on Transparent, I had been living like below a living wage for quite some time. I didn't have kids, so I could afford to do that. I could afford to be broke if that broke. But I had to decide that I had to redefine success for myself because I was still telling stories. I was getting accolades. I got a Guggenheim right around that time that I wanted to give up. And I realized that I was successful because I was making work. And whether that work was made for like literally the price of a pizza, and pulling people together. I also have a community of filmmakers, and we really did greenlight each other. We showed up for each other. We crewed for each other. I would do sound for a friend's project, even though I'm not a professional sound person. So this community is that I had, we really, that was currency we put in each other's projects. And then defining success. I mean, it sounds cliche, but it isn't, it's an inside job. And I knew that, that I was successful, that to make any work on any budget or no budget, year after year was actually success. And but definitely financial means is really important. So the only thing I can say is stay engaged in the process, develop a community of people. Like really, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't like the film community and the queer community that I had over the years been engaged with is really what kept me going. And then really Transparent is what broke me into having a chance to pay the bills, which was a game changer. And then I'm gonna let Joey jump in and I'll think about the second question. I hope there's some
Yeah.
stuff that's helpful though, because it is.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Am I off? You can hear me. Okay, great. I think I had like a really seminal experience with the movie Fish Tank by Andrea Arnold. Before I saw Fish Tank, wait, you guys can see me, right? Yes? You're good? I
Yep.
don't know why I got my, okay, great. Before I saw Fish Tank, I think I identified as a writer. I was like, I'm a writer. I'm going to be a screenwriter and I'm going to find directors to make my work. And something about Andrea Arnold's work really affected me. I think because she uses a square camera, or she uses a square, not a square camera, but a square format. And I think I really felt like I was really looking at the female gaze for the first time when I saw Fish Tank. Something about it felt different. I think because it wasn't landscape. And it really felt like it was taking me right into the yearning of the main character, and the camera stayed with her. And I think I was like, okay, I can do that, because I think I'd been looking at filmmaking and looking at people like Spielberg and Coppola and Scorsese and just thought like, cinema is composed and it's perfect. And what I found as a filmmaker was that gathering queer people together in a kind of circular vibe where nobody's in trouble and everybody, including the people holding the camera, are just in a sense of play. That was how I found my voice, AKA like Emmy award-winning director. Like, it's so crazy that I won those awards when actually what I was doing was bringing from Chicago the improv sense of yes and, bringing from, Stella Adler and Uta Hagen beat changes. Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. Beat changes and how like things happen in beats. And what else? A technique from a woman named Joan Shekel, and she was teaching us about that everybody, including the person who's holding the camera, is having a feeling, and we're documenting feelings. So that's what was really going on Transparent, and I think we were just playing. And so I want to go back to your original thing of like, how do I keep going? Every single thing that has ever turned out good for me whatsoever has been because it has been at a moment where I've given up on Hollywood. and I've reconnected with my favorite besties, whether it's my sibling or my best friend. And we just kind of pretend like we live in our own world and we're 15 and we create stuff for ourselves. And it either ends, as Silas said, it either ends up going somewhere or it doesn't, you know, but you kind of give it your all for a week or two, whatever that is, your script, your sizzle, you give it everything, show it to a few people. Never send those read this one instead emails. I don't know about you, Silas, but I say just don't send that read this one instead email. Just know that you're going to send your people, you know, you're going to send your stuff to people and they may or may not ever read it. They may or may not ever watch it. But they're people who will be cheerleaders on your way, and you know, let them give you notes as a way of feeling like they're part of your journey. But it has to be for you. When you bring the camera to the room, it has to be because you cannot wait to film these people you invited saying these words you wrote. And if you haven't written words that you cannot believe that you're going to get people to say, and you haven't brought in actors where you're like, oh, I mean, that's what I was doing on Transparent. I was like, oh my God. Silas, I remember exactly where I met you at LaMille. I remember being like, I'm going to meet Carrie Brownstein. And I remember she came to LaMille and I was thinking like, I'm meeting Carrie Brownstein. And then I'm thinking in my head, like, act normal. And, you know, when I was acting for the first time in my whole head, I'm like, I can't believe I'm acting in front of Carrie Brownstein. Like each and everything that ever happened on Transparent was like a personal dare, a private moment, a secret crush, inviting people to come be on the show. Like, once you kind of connect to your yearning, but realize that you don't actually have to talk about it as a filmmaker, you get to just put it on screen. It's really one of the most amazing jobs. And your job is to keep your mood up and to keep your artistic vision showing so everybody wants to go along with you. And after that, it kind of makes itself. And if it's meant to be, if it's meant to get big, I think it will get big on its own. And if you look around and you find yourself like pushing a rock up the hill and that you've been pushing a rock up the hill for a few years, like pick a new project.
Wow. Well, thank you both so much because that means the world to me. I love the rethinking what it means to be successful and also just to have fun with play. I look forward to watching Fish Tank.
Yeah, and
I
I would,
really,
oh, sorry, I would just add to that the fact that several of my projects were made when new technology was coming out, and like we did early video, which looked so awful until we did a Cinelook on it. And then also my second feature was when the DSLRs were happening, and that it doesn't take money to set a dynamic frame. And again, that's where the community comes in. And yeah, probably, you know, we do this because we just have to, otherwise we'd pick an easier way. But yeah.
thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, go ahead.
This is a question for Silas and building off of Lauren's question or your answer to Lauren's question, Silas. As all of the different folks that you kind of reinvested in each other with your personal capital and your time, as you all hit different trajectories in your career, how have you managed those relationships and including each other or kind of metering out your guys, you know, shared time with each other's projects as everybody grows in their own different timelines, their own different spaces?
Yeah, you know, I did go to UCLA for film school. Again, I wanted to buy time. I wanted to practice directing, which is really, you know, a difficult thing to practice, and build a community. And I still work with, yeah, people from my San Francisco community, and where I made my first feature, and then UCLA. And I guess, you know, we do stay in touch. We recommend each other. I think that's part of that bond. It's just natural. Like I will be in interviews for a job and I will pitch other directors, because if it's not going to be me, then I would love for it to be a friend of mine. And that's going to just make me look good because I recommended this badass filmmaker that's going to get the job. And so I'm always pushing for, and you know, it's not just altruistic on my part, it's selfish. I want cool people in the industry. I want them to, you know, thrive and us all to be there together. And, you know, when I first started passing as a dude, it was really eye-opening the way men worked together, cis men, especially white collar. One of the most, well, for one, there's no love like the love of a straight man for another straight man. It's just like more than any gay love I've ever seen. And the other thing is the power is if I have me and then my buddy comes in, that's double the power. We bring in a third person, that's triple. The rest of us, it's like one gets through the gate. And so scarcity becomes a real byproduct of trying to be successful in an industry that's meant to ignore you at best and destroy you at worst. And it's not the most comfortable process. So for me, bringing in people, the way we bring each other into successful places is self-serving. Service is selfish. It really helps us. And I think that I've been the beneficiary of that. And I have hopefully done that for people that I've extended opportunities to whenever I could. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a good way to play.
Yeah, and I've never really, I feel like, even had a moment to breathe, because I just feel like whenever I'm working, I'm not only working, but I'm also pulling every single person onto the boat I can think of at all times. Like we're all just reaching out the moment somebody goes, we need a blow. We're like, I got it. And we're just like every single person, every single role, every single, when we did the transformative action program at Transparent, we were asking each department head to meet some trans people and put at least one trans person in your department, even if they didn't have any experience whatsoever in the department. And this was like a personal kind of program. You couldn't have done it legally. You couldn't have done it with Amazon. You couldn't have done it with any real official thing because of the ways it was just sort of prioritizing, not white men, not white cis men, not white straight men. And you can't really, say that. So you have to kind of do it under the table. And as Silas said, behave the way that white men behave and that men behave when they always have each other's back, and borrow all that white privilege, just drape it on yourself and just do trans privilege and queer privilege and bring your friends, invite your friends, try to surround yourself with as many queer people or people of color as possible so that you can create like a different, universe inside of white supremacy and patriarchy. But yes, bring everybody you can. Like, you never stop. It's like the second you have your thing finished. For me, especially being a white person and a cis passing person, I'm always trying to reduce my role and make sure that like a trans woman of color or a person of color is out in front instead of me. At this point in my career, there's just sort of like, I do not need to be like the person out in front. Yet even with that intention, I still find myself going, oh, I have an idea. I'm a director. I'm the person out in front again. So even though I'm trying my hardest to center people of color and trans people of color, I'm still always coming up with ideas and centering myself and my white friends. So cis people are doing it, everybody's doing it, and you have to remind yourself every single day in the moment where you're like, oh, I could get somebody to do this. And then you go, wait, they're white. It's the same thing with race as it is with gender. And then you're like, oh, they're cis, so it's like something I think all of us have to be on top of, every hour for the rest of our lives. It doesn't end.
Yeah. I have a running list of people to recommend exactly that outside of my circle, because that opportunity comes and it goes so quickly that if I don't have a name or two when I get a chance to, and also, a little bit being a squeaky wheel, like asking for help is not easy, but if you are a decent person about it, and people who are active in the industry that you're looking to get into and they're open to it, sort of making yourself known. I definitely help people who reach out to me if I can.
Joey and Silas, I just want to check in. It's 3:53 our time. Are you feeling like you can take more questions? Are you feeling like you need to go? Let us
know. Joey, I know there's one question on the chat too.
In the chat. Okay, awesome. So sorry, Silas, you're feeling good to answer that question? Okay. And then Joey, how are you doing?
I'm actually like continually realizing that I should probably reach out to Colby and let them know where I am, because they're waiting for me to kind of show up. But I'm happy to answer one more question if that's okay, and then let Silas take over from here.
Beautiful. Thank you both. All right.
Yes.
I'm sorry, whoever wonderful human put your question into the chat. I am so sorry. We can't read it on my laptop because my laptop's being a jerk. So would you be so kind as to either ask your question aloud so we could all hear what it is? Or Joey or Silas, as you're answering that question, could you just kind of paraphrase and let us know what the question asked was?
If Kate can't read it out, I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Groovy. So Cade Alexander asks, when it's time for Zoom questions, for Silas, I am curious to hear about your experience during your first directional feature and how you balance co-writing, co-directing, and co-starring. Additionally, what advice would you give to someone who is approaching a directorial debut? Sorry, goodness.
Joey, why don't you go first? Because you definitely know director.
I mean, I remind people who are filmmakers and who are directors to think about themselves like, I'll say like, what's the name of your movie? And Silas will be like, by hook or by crook. And then I would be like, okay, you are the alderman / mayor of By Hook or By Crook. Like whatever you think, like none of it matters. All that matters is that you represent this film as a mayor, as a politician, as an alderman, and be willing to change your skill set. So the moment that you're directing on the set, yeah, you need to be paying attention to what's happening on the stage, on the screen, on the set. And you need to be in your emotions and feeling your body so that you can give feedback. But that's probably 10% of the time you're directing, maybe 2% of the time you're directing. Because there's the weeks before that are prepping and the months before where you're working with the screenwriter, the weeks after where you're editing. And even though the word is director or filmmaker, the job is really politician. And it's really important, I think, to help people feel like they're in their creative free spot. They're taking their creative risks because you believe in them. So rather than me sitting down with an editor and being like, okay, do this, do that, then this, then this, then this, then that, I always start and go like, what do you think? What do you feel? What's your response? Oh, wow. That scene reminded you of your childhood? Ooh, go there. Yeah, go in on that. Like, yes, 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 yes. And then I wait and see what they make. And then I live with it for a few days. And then I wait to have an emotional response. And then I share the emotional response and let them come up with a solution. So for me, a director is more than just like writing your screenplay and making sure people get it right. That's a way to do it. It's a really patriarchal way to do it. And I find it to be a really uncomfortable way to do it because you're just walking around mad all day because you feel like nobody's listening to you. But I think as a director, you can really come in as a politician and inspire everybody to do their best work. You wrote the script, or you certainly take a pass at the script. You can change it on the day. You can edit it later. So I think the job of a director is really to just be like a kind of loving guru who really wants everybody to have a great time and has really nothing at stake financially, but everything is at stake emotionally and philosophically, wants to be there as a real leader to pull people into the magic of art. As opposed to like, you better do this right because this is my thesis project. Now I get to get mad. We're out of money. Now I get to get mad at you. We just went over budget. Now I get to get mad at you. Those are the typical ways people make films. So if you just do something other than that, I find like amazing, amazing things happen.
Yes. Yeah, I would just add to that. In terms of the first part of the question, co-directing, I've done 2 films co-director, and was such a collaboration, like directing, just like what Joey was saying, it's a collaboration. Like my job is to read a room, to make sure there's no naysayers or anybody unhappy on set is my job to address because it will start to bring everything down. Hopefully I create enough trust on set to allow mistakes to happen or things that we might want to try that may or may not work. And so it is really about caretaking. I think for me, directing is a lot about making it safe and making it collaborative so that people, and I've found really it's powerful, and I've grown to do this more and more on set, is like admitting when I've made a mistake, definitely never throwing anyone under the tracks, and saying I don't know sometimes. Like, it really is this myth of like the right way and the one way. But as far as co-directing, because it is such a collaboration, I have found it to be I co-directed with my best friend, Harry Dodge. So, we'd known each other forever. And it went really well. And second one I did with a friend, Ernesto Fronda, both went really well in terms of we divided and conquered sometimes. We direct, one person would be in the scene, the other one would be directing. By the time you get to post on any indie feature, it's pretty rough. So usually if it went awry, it went a little bit awry, not awry, but it would just being broke for a long time starts to wear on you. And so there we would have to kind of like really make sure that we're on the same page about how we were working in the post-production, because everybody goes and you're like, yay, you made it, oh good, you know, and then you're like, oh shit, we're gonna make this into a movie now. But yeah, and then the directing, yeah, I think all of those things that Joey said, and really it is just this exploration, you know, like there's so many discoveries. You hope to just have enough room, plan the hell out of everything, and then be okay if that plan completely changes on the day. You have to be present. I think that's what I love about being on set most, is I'm a little ADD, so I have to be so much in the moment. It just pulls you that way, and it's kind of a beautiful place to be in the middle of chaos.
Thank you both so much, Joey. I'm just mindful here. I want to make sure that we're not taking up too much of your time. Do you need to jump off?
Yeah, I'm gonna dash off and say thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Rafael, for thinking of me and finding my mom. Thank you,
Thank
students
you,
at
Joey.
SYU in Carbondale. It was great to be a guest. Sorry I was late. Great to
No
see you,
worries.
Silas. Hopefully I'll see you all soon.
I
Can't wait to see what you all make as cultural creators and queer people out here coming to the world. And I support you however we can.
Thanks, Joey. One more round of applause for them.
Bye, guys. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Right, and Silas, you're good to stay on for a little longer.
Yes, I am, absolutely.
Do we have any questions for Silas?
I can ask a
Yeah, go ahead.
question. Millie, this is sort of inspired by a lot of what Joey was saying in terms of yearning to disrupt and such, but it's still sort of a general question. So my question is, how do you go about using queerness as a selling point in terms of pitching your work and so forth? And is it even possible to really use queerness as a pitching point still today in terms of just dealing with that among American social conservatism?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, the interesting thing for me is that I came of age in San Francisco in the early 90s. So AIDS was in full-fledged, wrecking the community. And we were the younger generation that was like, we either be in shame or we be really out. So we like Mohawk tattooed, my band Tri-Bait was very, very out in a lot of straight spaces. So I kind of come from this like idea that if there's success nowhere on the horizon, we can't fail. Like nobody expected anything from us. So we just went all out, and nothing of that I did was very tame or very pandering. Very much the opposite. Even like with By Hook or By Crook, I'm like, okay, gay people are going to hate this film. They're just going to hate this film. And it actually wasn't the case, which was really nice to be busted. And even my band were like, oh, straight punk dudes are going to hate this band. And that actually wasn't the case either. We actually got boycotted at Michigan Women's Music Festival, ironically. But so you never know where your support's going to come from. I do think that what is very frustrating, and I try to be positive, but what is frustrating is being able to tell our stories. A lot of times people not from our world get to tell our stories, and that's the case for white people telling any BIPOC story. I mean, it happens, in queerness and trans stories that are told by non-queer, non-trans people. And so it is a very frustrating thing, because it's almost like we're not trusted to tell our own stories. We're going to make it small, but meanwhile, you can see huge shows that represent that. So I do think, I mean, I think the kids are very queer these days. The kids, I like the youth, and I think that it's really changing. I think that shift is changing, but the industry is slow to catch on. And so I can only tell the stories I can tell. I'm just not interested in anything, but I've been excited to tell stories that are in other worlds. But I guess the thing is, I won't say the industry is super great about it, but they're gonna have to. They're just gonna have to be. All the shows I've worked on are queer. Dickinson is a reimagining of Emily Dickinson, who's in love with her brother's wife and is very much like a teen goth rebellious spirit. Everything's gonna be okay. Josh Thomas is a gay man who goes home to visit his dad and ends up staying there because the father dies to take care of his two sisters, who are one is on the autism spectrum, which also get to work with authentic casting in that show. Yeah, Tales of the City, High Maintenance had a ton of queerness, transparent. Pose obviously was great because we had 5 trans women of color. So we learn about people by relationships that they have to others. So when we're tokenized, it's the one, and they're not having any engagement with the other characters on the show. And so, oh, in A League of Their Own, yes, absolutely. But when you have more than one, then people just start to project their selves onto it instead of it being siloed and weird talking points. So I do think that, I had a friend that came out because of watching Pose, and it was really like a really profound experience for her. And so yeah, I think I've been very fortunate to be on a lot of these queer and trans shows. So I would just say, I don't know if that's what you're asking, but yeah, just continuing to do it. I mean, they can't really deny the direction that it's going as much as they're going to try. And I think all the pushback on queerness and transness is all the more reason these stories are important for sure, and will be breaking through in the mainstream continuously, disrupt it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Who else? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, so I'm a junior in the School of Media Arts program, and so I just wanted to ask, how did you really get how did you bring yourself up in the industry? Because going to a smaller school like with a media arts program, which Peace and Love is not as developed as some of the other schools here, it's kind of scary thinking about getting out of school and finding a job in the industry that I'm trying to go into. And so I just kind of wanted to ask, how did you start out in your industry, and how did you work your way up?
Sure. I mean, I will say I didn't get my undergrad degree until I was in my 30s, and the school I got my undergrad degree is a hipster bar in San Francisco now. It's like non-existent. And so I did go to UCLA because I was in California, and it was more affordable then. But I really went to that to practice directing and to be able to teach. And then I did teach film. In terms of the way I got into the industry, it really was through personal connections. My first feature, while it didn't make us a dime, it was respected by key people. And one of them was the producer of Transparent. She loved the film. And so I was one of the people they thought of. And then, all of that is like, I think all of the smaller budget personal work is what actually got me in the industry, to be honest. And so I feel like that, and then reaching out, I just didn't stop asking people questions. It took me a while, but we have to trust that we are charming enough to ask people about ways to get into various fields, and just advice from people. And I had a friend just say, you've got to, when I would be shy about it, she was like, there's people that want to help you. You just have to like give them an opportunity to. And when I think about people that I extend help to, if somebody's in my visual field or they're in touch with me, and they're not like a jerk about it, it really helps to just remind them like, this is the thing you want to do. And then of course doing the work, making the work no matter what, making work on whatever way you can, I think is really to stay engaged in the process. Don't wait for permission. If I waited for permission, I'd be still like, yeah, not anywhere near where I am now.
Good question. Thank you, Anna. Any other questions?
There's one on
Yeah, what is it?
Zoom.
Yeah.
Should I read it? When working on a show about queer and trans stories, how do you work on projects in which other people may offer up something that might be a stereotype or even harmful in the creative process? Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So yeah, I definitely spend a lot of time stressed out on shows where if I feel like there's something that might hit a trope or and I just basically talk about it. I think it's like Transparent really encouraged that. One of the things that Soloway did that I really respected was take in everybody's opinion. It didn't matter if you're in the writer's room, you're a PA, and because we had trans and queer people throughout the whole set, that opinion could come through. That made a difference. Like if your set looks like what the world of your story looks like, you're going to have much more ease and access to authentic storytelling. But yeah, I think what I've done is I've just tried to, with TV, I'm not in charge. Even if I'm an executive producer, I'm a voice among many. So I just pitch like there's no tomorrow and offer up ideas that I think will help, and people that maybe could be consultants. I brought on ballroom consultants to pose, which was desperately needed. And I'm really glad they did that. And so I think that kind of stuff. And, same with my last feature that I did for 20th Century, Darby and the Dead, is a teen film. It's Mean Girls Meets Sixth Sense. And so it's about this young girl who gets a gift of out of almost dying, and her mom dies when she's young, and she gets out of that trauma, she gets this gift of helping dead people pass on. And we did a lot of I would call color conscious casting. We didn't do colorblind casting. We actually remolded the roles based on the actors that we cast, and we talked through everything, flipping any trope, even in the glow up that she gets, this sort of trope of the teen movie and the makeover. She goes from her straightened hair to natural hair, and that was like, for a lot, we talked a lot about that. We even stopped filming that scene so that we could talk with Riel Downs, our lead, and her mom, and it was almost like an intergenerational conversation about hair. And so it was really, it takes time, and it takes paying attention, and not being afraid to ask questions, even if to run the risk of asking a question that might be uncomfortable, just to make sure that due diligence is approached, because it matters what we show. It matters a lot. I try to think about like what trauma we're showing and why a lot.
It's occurring to me, you mentioned being an EP on pose and stuff. A lot of folks in here, I think, want to go into TV, write for TV, do like TV kind of production of some sort. And I'm wondering if you could just break down for us very briefly, right? Like how a show gets made, right? And so we can even talk adaptation a little bit vis-a-vis Dickinson and how you adapted the text of her life, or how you made Paris's Burning into Pose, right? How you came up with the pitch for that, how that worked on, and then it's a two-parter. Sorry, you could also kind of disambiguate, right? Like what an EP does versus what a showrunner does versus what a staff writer does, and so on.
Sure. Yeah. I could just talk about Dickinson and Pose. Like with Pose, Paris's Burning is very iconic. Within the ballroom community, it's very controversial because of a lot of the outsider gaze. And so there was a real push with Pose to definitely fold in that world and bring on consultants. So I not only some of the icons like Hector Extravaganza, who played small roles, but current ballroom members that were house ball community activists and really also knew the era, so that we got it right. And I feel like that consultants, it's a tricky thing. I think sometimes bringing on consultants can be a just checklist, and they don't listen to the people that are consulting. So I don't want to paint a picture like that's a real fix. It's a temporary fix. A real fix is to have as many people in the writing room that are from that world, or at least a mix of points of view. So there was a lot of talk about that, and then bringing in Janet Mock and Lady J, Lady J worked on Transparent with Pose to make sure that those tropes were hit. Like I can tell my own tropes about trans mask characters. Like I want to be able to tell the stories I want to tell, but not because I think access to experience can allow it to be messy. But with Pose, it was a lot about that. It was a lot about consulting and bringing writers into the writers' room that were from the world. And, like the scenes where like all the categories, the big ball scenes were, everybody in that room were from the community. People came up from all over. They came up from Georgia, Virginia, whatever, to participate, all intergenerational. I mean, it was a party, and it was really incredible. And that energy, again, I think the energy on set does translate. And then with Dickinson, there was a lot of vernacular that was like, current way that young people talk. Anachronistically put in with Emily Dickinson. So it's like a half-hour comedy, but people are in period costumes. And each season asked a question like, what if it, in the first season, patriarchy stops her. And then the second season, it's like, well, what if patriarchy doesn't stop her? What if it's about fame and the compromise that comes along with that? And then the third season was she a wartime poet? Because most of her writing happened during the Civil War. And that season was, talk about a tight tone to walk. It had comedic actors, and it had a lot of true storylines. Like Emily Dickinson wrote to this guy, Colonel Higginson, who was an avid abolitionist and feminist. And they wrote together for 20 years, and then he led one of the first all-black troops to fight the South. And there was like really all of the details in that season were very true, and there was a lot of really intense stuff that came up. And so I feel like that adaptation is just how do you, again, I think it comes down to themes, like the way we looked at each season, and the way that how absurd the truth can be. So I feel like when you're adapting something, you really, yeah, it's much less about the details and it's much more about the structure of it. What is it saying? What do you want people to feel when they're watching it? And what is it that this story is saying thematically? I think is the first guidepost I would recommend. And an executive producer does anything from on Dickinson, I was in the writer's room, I was co-show running, I was hiring directors and on set through the whole way, you know, taking care of cast and all of that. And then with Transparent, I did a co-producing first half of season 3. So I shot a lot of stuff with Soloway, and we did the whole first 4 episodes like a movie. On Pose, it was more contained to the on-set and the, you know, consultants and the nuts and bolts. Ryan Murphy's very keeps things very compartmentalized, so it really runs the gamut. But yeah, I do think that room also had a lot of different kind of people in the room. We had Z-Way, we had Lynn Nottage, we had a academic writer who had never written for TV, but they met the showrunner on Twitter. So there's a lot of different ways these days. There is a lot more access. They need your voices. That's the thing. It's a bunch of bullshit that, you know, it's so hard for us to get and break through because they really, to stay relevant, they need stuff outside of what they do all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have one. It's taken me so long. I've been trying to find a way to word this correctly. So, I mean, so I'm Dahlia, she, her. When I've been thinking a lot about queer and trans storytelling, and in particular to you as a storyteller for that. Is the idea of representation and having our voices heard at all and telling our stories, does it feel weird that we even have to? Because it, like, you don't go into Blockbuster Video to the straight section to find The Notebook and Titanic. But if you want to find a queer movie, you have to go to the queer section.
Yeah.
To find things like Fire by Deepa Mehta or The Watermelon Woman by Cheryl Dunye. But you know, for the straight story, you would just go to the romance because they're seen as the default, put in that position by themselves. And it's just, my question is, doesn't it? So I guess my question is, would the end? Sorry, I guess my question is, would the end goal as being a queer and trans storyteller be for there to be more, or would it be in a larger sense for it to not be queer and trans storytelling, but just storytelling, like culturally?
Yeah. Let me see if I can. So I definitely understand what you're saying. When I was at Sundance with my first feature, it was a lot. They didn't even have words for our film. Like they kept trying to call it a lesbian film. And so we wrote a whole thing about gender and that it wasn't a lesbian film. And then we were doing an interview for NPR, and you know, the person, we were giving our whole like thing about gender in the movie. And basically they just kept saying, well, straight people watch this movie. And I was like, well, I'm not French. I watch French films. I'm, I'm not a shark. I watch Jaws. Like, do we really have to be so literal about stories only being for certain people? And isn't storytelling all about going into unfamiliar worlds and finding the familiar, right? That's like the power that it can have. And so I agree with you. And when I get asked, you know, do I worry about being pigeonholed as just telling queer and trans stories? I'm like, I don't. I only want to tell stories of characters who happen to be queer and trans. I really like that is not a pigeonholing thing, and that is not limited. That's only as limited as human experience is limited. So I do agree with you, and but I have benefited from LGBTQ film festivals, of which they're harder and harder to keep alive, because all those lean years I could have an audience to watch my work with, and that really kept me going. So but I do agree, a story is a story. And like I said, if it's authentically told, I've related to a lot of stories that have nothing to do with me, and they're like my favorite films, and it's just because they had agency to tell a story that was just a human story. So I hope that that is the case sooner than later. So y'all just got to make a bunch of work.
Well, we got time for about 2 more questions. Anyone else?
There's one on Zoom.
There's one on Zoom.
Oh, there's one on Zoom? Okay, yeah.
I think so. Sarah wanted to ask a question. Oh,
Probably stalling on it if I should even ask, but I think I'm actually from San Francisco from around the same time. So I saw you play a lot, like Mud Women, stuff
oh,
like
cool.
that. Yeah. And and it makes me think about how also I went back to San Francisco and I did this documentary project I never finished actually, but I went and interviewed this people in their 70s who had been on strike at San Francisco State in the 60s. And this one guy, Terry Collins, said to me that I asked him, like, what did he see as being revolutionary now? And he said the trans people. And he said that's the most powerful, brave, courageous, like true to themselves. Because he was talking about what did it mean to be true to themselves. When they wanted to get Black studies at state, he said, well, we really wanted Marxist studies, but like, okay, they acknowledge we're also Black. So we'll say Black because nobody will give us Marxist. So that's where I'm going with this. Like you're talking about bringing all these different people in. You talked about your own poverty, which I really appreciate because people don't usually talk about that. And I just wondered if the kinds of, and I love what the kinds of things Joey spoke about you know, really relentlessly bringing people in. And I also have to say that not all white cis men are not queer, you know, and so there's this other thing that somehow needs to, yeah, like
the other male gaze. Yeah.
Messy, yeah. So what do you see any kind of like anecdotally in your feelings about is there something changing? Or like there is this connection. I'm saying I'm imputing here that there is a connection between this kind of being of expanding beyond the normativity of just being one thing and one way that is also revolutionary in an economic sense, revolutionary in class sense, revolutionary in a, you know, the ecosexual sense. And I just wondered if that's something that you feel reverberating at all in the industry that you're working in.
Well, yeah, no, I have a lot of amazing things. I'm not sure if this will answer your question, but I do think my experience like with Tri-Bait is yeah, we played a lesbian bookstore in Berkeley. We played a heavy metal club in Detroit. We played Luke Campbell from Two Live Cruise hip hop cruise boat thing in Florida. And because we didn't fit in anywhere, we went everywhere. We really didn't have a group of people, and in a way that was a blessing. And I do think there's not one person or kind of, you know, we live in a country that gaslights us around race, gender, class. I mean, probably my class upbringing is the more interesting thing to me about my life than my transness. And so I think all those things are on the table, and you know, that all of that richness is on the table for storytelling. And you know, what we did in San Francisco is we pretended the revolution already happened and acted like as if. And you know, it didn't work all the time, but it definitely was fun for the band to do that, because we also faced a lot of hatred and some risk of violence and all of that as well. But yeah, I do think there's so many opportunities in storytelling, and there's so many opportunities in this recovered history. Poe is one example, Dickinson's another, that it's really it's a rich resource for the industry. So I think it is of value, whether they know it or not.
Oh, that answer, thank you. And the Dickinson project sounds amazing. Thanks for letting me ask the question, y'all.
Of course, thank you.
Wonderful question. Thank you, Sarah. Anyone want to be our last question asker before we let Silas go? Yes, Graham, go for it. Get in that hot seat, dude.
Okay. Hi, I'm Graham. I watched Dickinson for my other class. It's a women and gender studies class. We were talking about women's sexual agency, and particularly how Emily Dickinson has now become like a lesbian imagination like space. And as somebody who is transmasculine, who is attracted to men, a lot of that has come to me through like imagination and like what are the possibilities of who I can be and who I can be with. And I just want to know, how did the idea for Dickinson come along, and what are some of the things you could say about, like, because particularly we're living in a time of ramping repression of queer people, but also we have more opportunities to imagine ourselves. Like Emily Dickinson was in a very like restrictive society, but she was still able to have pleasure. And we watched the scene from the episode of volcanoes, and I just think that like ending scene where it's like this sort of like eruption of pleasure, and like this moment where somebody who is so in such a restrictive environment can have pleasure and can live a secret life but a full life of like imagination and stuff like that. So I was wondering, what can you say on like queer imagination, and also just Emily Dickinson in general, because I love her.
Yeah, no, so the show creator, Elena Smith, is the one that got the show picked up by Apple, which is amazing. But I know one of the main things the show was looking at is the past is present, that history is carried with us, and certainly we are fed a certain version of what history is. Like, for example, that trans people were just discovered, 10 years ago, whatever. When in fact, like when we were doing the third season on the Civil War, there was this thing I read as a footnote that they're like, a lot of women went to fight in the Civil War as men, and a good portion of those people did not return to living as women in society. And I was like, oh, there's my people. There's some trans people in there. And there was one famous trans person who fought in the Civil War, then went to work on a farm, had to go to the doctor, got outed as being born female. And actually all his buddies came to protest them taking his pension away, but he was nonetheless institutionalized in a female mental institution. And he would take safety pins and make his dressing gown into pants. And so there's like a little nod to that character in the episode in season 3 when Emily Dickinson gets thrown in insane asylum. But yeah, I think that that's when I talk about the richness of stories. There's so much directionally, but and it's also there's a lot of writing on trans and queerness and science fiction, and so thinking forward and backwards, we really, I don't know, I think it makes sense because we have been around forever and there's so little documentation, or it's like they were roommates. They were, they shared cats and bills together. Like they just don't, there's just so much hiding of history. And then, privilege can also cover it up, who has to be outed and not. So yeah, I don't know. Mainly I would just say, yeah, I think the queer imagination is a rich field to run in, I would say. And Emily Dickinson definitely seems pretty queer AF to me.
That's an excellent note to end on. Silas, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Yeah.